Good evening, friends. Welcome to this evening of INTACH's program. A warm welcome to each of you who's joined us today, to members and friends of INTACH. I have great pleasure in welcoming the speaker of this evening, Janani, Lakshminarayan and Gurucharan. INTACH, as you all know, is an acronym for the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, which was set up as a non-profit organization in 1984 with a vision to spearhead heritage, awareness and conservation in India and to protect India's vast, unprotected, built, cultural, natural and intangible heritage. So what exactly is intangible heritage? The term cultural heritage has changed content considerably in the recent decades. Cultural heritage does not only mean monuments or collection of objects. It includes non-physical intellectual wealth, such as folklore, customs, beliefs, traditions, knowledge, language, and living expressions. All of these inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants. It spans performing arts, social sciences, practices, rituals, festive events, and other practices concerning nature and the universe, including the knowledge and skill to produce traditional craft. While intangible heritage is fragile, this cultural heritage is a very important factor in maintaining our cultural diversity. It is this wealth of knowledge and skill that is transmitted from one generation to the next. Today, we focus on one aspect of this wealth, Kolams, an intrinsic part of the culture of our region and most appropriate for the month that has just begun, Margazhi. While it may at a glance seem to be an auspicious sign of welcome and well-being, simple to perceive and comprehend, it actually, at a deeper level, represents abstract concepts of philosophy, the oneness of everything manifest in the universe, the unit, which is a part of the whole, magical motifs woven into the fabric of our very being. An amazing aspect of Kolams is its impermanence, the transitory and ephemeral nature of the way it's done. Some Kolams last for a day, some just for a few hours, and some even just moments in a ritual until a pattern is created for another time and another day. This aspect of renewal means both change and continuity, just like life itself. We are delighted that Janani will speak on this topic today. To introduce Janani, she is a freelance writer and an avid kolam artist, exploring its nuances and indulging in this very calming everyday ritual as a means of her creative expression. She is a computer science engineer who switched career paths to foray into studying journalism, and that opened her mind to a different perspective of life. Janani is deeply committed to parenting with ideals steeped in intersectional feminism. She's passionate about food writing, experimenting with different cuisines, and tracing the origins of culinary traditions. And maybe that's for another session. Janani will today explore the significance of intangible cultural heritage of Kolam in its ecological, mathematical, philosophical, religious, and historical contexts, which makes it culturally relevant and will continue to delight and stimulate the interest of generations to come. I look forward to Janani's exploration of columns. A warm welcome to you, Janani, and
Thank
over
you.
to you.
Thank you so much, Sujata. I'm delighted to present this talk on columns. Without further ado, let me share this presentation. I thank INTACH for giving me this wonderful opportunity. I'm waiting to share the screen. Yes, thank you. Is the screen visible?
Thank you.
Yes, Akka.
Is the screen visible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you. So this talk is about Kolam, which is a perfect blend of art and science. We'll see why. I start with this wonderful quote by Chantal Jumel, who I believe is also here in this meeting. A kolam is a painted prayer. With the ground as the canvas, hands as the instrument, rice paste or rice flour and colored powders as paint, the kolam draws the viewer into a world of divine symbols and mystical attributes. Indeed, it does. So what is a kolam? Generally, a kolam can be considered as a pattern of lines and curves drawn either freehand or on a grid of dots or pulleys that are encircled, looped or joined using straight or wavy or curved lines, all kinds of lines. It's also a Hindu tradition where women at the at some kind of a threshold they draw this art. It's a ephemeral art. It's ephemeral in the sense that it is something which has a very short span of life. It is drawn on a spatial threshold, meaning either in front of a house or a building, in front of the Tulasi Madam, or in the puja room, or any space where a Hindu religious ritual is about to happen, like a homam. It's also drawn on a temporal threshold, which is the period of transition between dawn and dusk. So when darkness to dawn is when a kolam is drawn in the mornings, in the early morning. And again, when dawn changes to dusk is when it's drawn. Or according to the Hindu calendar, we have the change of direction of the earth in the celestial space, which is either summer or winter solstice called Uttarayan or Dakshinayan. Now, kolam is ubiquitous, especially in South India, and especially so in Tamil Nadu. When you're walking on the streets or driving by, you are most likely to see numerous kolams in front of homes or buildings. Kolam is a tribute to harmonious existence, where it is a means to feed insects and unseen beings or small birds, etc. Now, what is a kolam? A kolam is a design whose elements include lines without dots, or lines connecting dots, or over and above dots, and a geometric freehand shape without lines or dots. And usually a kolam is said to have some form of symmetry, but not necessarily so all the time. Now, importantly, kolam involves concentration. It's something that is that you can see where a memory is being used. Our memory is being used where visual memory, which is iconic memory, semantic memory, that of facts or concepts, and procedural memory, which is the muscle memory. So when you're used to drawing it, your hand automatically adjusts itself to the curves and lines. And a series of disciplined hand and body movements with great dexterity and speed, which obviously comes due to experience. This tradition is kept alive organically, where you learn from practitioners, you learn from chapbooks, You learn with experience and observation. Kolam means to make highly intricate and complex designs that can vary according to events and days of the Hindu calendar. It's interesting to note that it's a regional variation of a pan-Indian culture. So all over India, there are regions where some form of floor art is practiced. The purpose, intention, and the symbolic value of this art is a unifying factor for all regions. However, the patterns can be distinct to the region and the community. It's called Rangavalli in Karnataka. You can see the different names that it's called. Muggulu in Andhra or Telangana, Alpna or Alpona in Bengal, Aripana in Bihar, Satya in Gujarat, Mandana in Rajasthan, and Chauk Purna in Uttar Pradesh. Here is a beautiful visual of Srimati M.S. Subbulakshmi drawing a lotus kolam with wet flour, that is the Ma kolam. Why is a kolam drawn? I interacted with a lot of people who practice drawing the kolam, and I gathered this information from whatever they had to say, and as a practitioner myself. Kolam marks a spatial and temporal threshold. It represents wellness in the household. So we know that when there is a kolam outside the house, all is well in that household. When there is no kolam, it's also believed that probably the household is in a period of mourning or ritual impurity, which is menstruation. The kolam is an illustrated prayer for forgiveness to Bhudevi, the goddess of the earth, because we stamp on her and we probably spit on her for, do things that are not really considered sacred, for which we ask for forgiveness. It is an invitation to the feminine divine, which is the Lakshmi Kadaksham. So when you draw the kolam, it is aesthetically pleasing and it's said to bring prosperity. It is also seen as a means of protection to ensnare evil spirits or to ward off the evil eye. A kolam, interestingly, is seen as a differentiating factor between a public and a private sphere. So we draw it just outside the house, where inside the house is the private sphere, and outside it is the public sphere. Kolam is an auspicious sign, which brings Mangalakaram. It is also commemorating a festive spirit, or it's used for decorative purposes to celebrate events or festivals or functions. The aesthetic appeal of the kolam is something that brings a lot of positivity. And religiously, for Hindus, in the Hindu text of Manusmriti, there are 5 daily offerings for a Hindu householder, which is called the Panchayajnas. And one of them, called the Prahuta, it means to feed all created beings. So this is seen as a karmic obligation. A very interesting slide this one is, where we are looking at the origin of the design and history of the kolam. The kolam is a polysemous word which has multiple meanings of either appearance or guise, beauty, where we say manakolam, form, play, and order, lack of which is what we call alangolam. It is a practice, this practice of floor art, as we know it now, of drawing in thresholds, these designs that we use now, it's not really known to be ancient, according to Gift Shiromani. He says it's approximately just 600 years old. Also, there is no mention in ancient Tamil word lists called Nigandus. There is no mention of this form of floor art, though there are multiple words, multiple times that the word kolam is referenced in the Sangam literature, but it doesn't necessarily mean this kolam as we know it now, or what we're talking about. The kolam the yantras and the geometric patterns of the kolam, some of them are from the Vedic period. It's as old as 1500 BCE. This is interesting. The Sona illustrations of Angola, which is a storytelling form of art, where you draw designs on the sand. This from the 6th century BCE. This you can see is a traditional Angolan Luzona, which represents a chased chicken's path. It can be easily mistaken for a Sikh kolam from today. Now, this picture that you see here is the Solomon's Knot. Solomon's Knot, the picture that you see here is actually a Roman mosaic pavement from the 4th century CE, clicked in the Basilica of Aquileia from Italy. Now, the basilica has been reconstructed over a period of time, multiple times, but this pavement has been left alone from the 4th century. So this Solomon's Knot is something I urge you to remember, for we will see it in later slides why. Now, the designs, some of these designs without the dots, they can be traced to Jain temples of South Kannada, in the 1,000-pillared Basti at Modbidri, and in Mahayana Buddhism, where you see this is the Buddhist eternal knot. The symbol is used in a lot of Buddhist forums and organizations as the emblem. And this is a very ancient Buddhist knot, where you can see that it's strikingly similar to the Mittai Pottalam Sippukolam that you see here. Early literary references to the word kolam, or to kolam, the art kolam. One of the earliest is in Nachiyar Tirumuri, where Andal talks about the art of the floor art. She uses the Sanskrit word mandalam. She says, Tayyuru Tingalum Tirai Vilakki Tan Mandalamitte Masi Munnal. In the month of Thai, I swept the ground, drew sacred mandalas, Tan Mandalamitte. There's also the second verse that says, Vellai Nun Manar Kondu Teruvaninde, which means I dressed the streets with fine white sand. Vellai Nun Manal Kondu Teruvaninde. Later than that, we see Kumara Gurubarar's work from the 16th century, where he talks about the art of kolam. This is the first instance where kolam is referred to the way we know it today. Kunguvan Chandanam Kurambir, Kuraithu Tarai Meligi, Kolamitte, Kungiliye Kurumbugai Kati, where he talks about making a paste mixed with sandal and kumkum, and you smear the floor and decorate the floor with a lovely kolam, after which you spread fragrant smoke. Prior to this, in Sanskrit literature, we have the Narada Shilpa Shastra, where the art of floor decoration is called Bhuma Chitra. This, while it doesn't refer to the word kolam, it talks about categorization as dhuli, which is limestone powder drawing that exists for a short period of time, rasa, which is the paste of ground rice and water that is made into a kolam. It also talks about mandala chitra, which is patterns carved on the walls, ceilings, and pillars. There are also literary texts, which are inscriptions in 13th century, as well as the Sri Dharma Paddhati by Trayambaka Yadvan, in which there is mention about this design of the kolam on the floor. Now, coming to the components of kolam. What do we do to draw the kolam? What do we use to draw the kolam? We use KOLAM-A. KOLAM-A is just pure raw rice flour. There's also kola podi, which is very contemporary, where we use a combination of raw rice flour and limestone powder. And there is also the KOLAM-A, which is the wet mix, which is stone ground raw rice paste. I mean, soaked and ground raw rice paste, which is what we use to draw a ma kolam. Then we have the kavi or semman, which is red brick powder that is used to highlight some elements of the kolam. In some cultures, manjal is also used while drawing the kolam. Today, we also use stencils and rollers made of brass or other metals and plastic. And for rangoli, we use bright colored powders, which are either chemical powders or if it's homemade, then perhaps natural colors. And then there are plastic stick-on decals, as well as machine-cut plastic shapes, which can be assembled together to form the shape of a kolam or the design of a kolam. What are the types of kolam here? I loosely categorized it in two ways, one based on the medium and one based on the design. So based on the medium, there's the podi kolam and the ma kolam. Podi kolam is this either the kola podi or the kola maava, the dry kola maava. You use pinches of the dry flour. It's taken in between the thumb and the first finger. And then you let the powder fall in a dot or a continuous line. You see how my thumb is moving along the finger. This will enable you to draw different shapes, or they enable the powder to go in the desired direction. Then you have the Ma kolam, where you use a small wet cloth. It's dipped in ground rice paste, and then the wet cloth with the rice paste is the paste is guided through either the middle or the ring finger to draw the patterns on the floor. This is just like how ink flows through the nib of a fountain pen. Now, based on design, we can loosely categorize it as either Pulli kolam or the Code kolam, Nelivu kolam or the Sikku kolam or Kambi kolam. Then you have the Padi kolam or the Katta kolam. And then you have the mandalas, which are just freehand drawings based on some sort of a symmetrical pattern. This is interesting, where we have two other categories of the kolam, which is the Isai kolam and the Neer kolam. Isai kolam is where we have dots that represent notes. So for each transition between notes, we connect the dots. So when we sing, the notes you transition from one note to another, and as that transition happens, the dots are connected accordingly. As the song progresses, the appropriate dots are joined, and when the song ends, the kolam is complete. There is also the Neer kolam, where oil is smeared on a flat plate with a rim, and then the kolam is drawn with dry rice powder. Then you pour water carefully from one corner until the entire design is submerged, and finally the kolam appears to float in water. I remember the Neer kolam from very long ago as a child, when my father used to draw this for Navratri. Unfortunately, it's becoming a lost art. Then we have the Pulli kolam, where dots are placed on the floor in grid patterns. These dots are either placed, as you can see, in Neer Pulli, which is straight lines, or in Idai Pulli, which is interspersed between one another. Dots are the vertices that are connected using straight, curved, or wavy lines. You can see here how one dot is connected to the next and to the next. See, so it forms a pattern. These are curved lines that are used, and then you have straight lines and other designs that can be connected, that can be drawn by connecting the dots. And dots are not generally visible in the completed kolam. So the dots are used more like a guiding point. This is the Pulli kolam. You have these spectacular Pulli kolams too, where this is the Shankha Chakra kolam, and this is the lamp kolam drawn by Srimati Hema Kannan from Mumbai. I think this has a great prospect for giving vent to a creative, your imaginative abilities. We also have so many contemporary designs in the Pulli kolam, where you have rabbit kolams, butterfly kolams. I've even seen Mickey Mouse kolams and Santa Claus kolams recently. Then you have the second variety, which is the Chikku kolam or the Sikku kolam. In this Sikku kolam, the lines do not touch the dots. So what happens is, it is formed by looping the dots by a single continuous line or by several lines crossing one another, forming intertwined patterns, as you can see on the slide behind. It involves drawing a line looped around a collection of dots placed on a plane such that these mandatory rules are followed. All the line orbits should be closed. So there is no line that is just left open and hanging. All the dots are encircled, and no two lines can overlap over a finite length. This is the Sikku kolam. It's also the kind of kolam in which several challenges for knots are executed. This is a simple 5 by 5 grid. It's a Neer Pulli Sikku kolam. You can see a few combinations. If you ask a practitioner, you're likely to hear that there can be infinite number of combinations for a 5 by 5 kolam. This is where we use computer science to predict the total number of columns that can be drawn for a particular grid. We'll talk about this in the coming slides. Here is a video where you can see a simple near pulli sikku kolam being drawn. Now you can see how the grid is being drawn here. So there are 2 dots, 2, 4, 6, 8, and then it goes back to 8, 6, 4, and 2. This column is one where you use several lines, not a single one stroke column. So you see that every dot has to be encircled by a line, so like a loop. It's a fairly simple column where there are no knots involved. And with practice, avid practitioners, you can see that the lines will actually be straight. Also, the thickness of the lines is determined by the stress you apply between the fingers. So when you apply more stress, the lines thin down because less flour is allowed to pass through fingers. It looks like a shape of a tarambu. It's also a very commonly practiced column. Now here we have the most spectacular Brahma Mudi, which is Brahma's knot. The specialty of this column, this is a Sikku column again, as you see, is if you begin the column from say this point, when you finish the column, you will end at the same point. That is how intricate the knot is. There are several versions of the Brahma Mudi column. I picked 2 spectacular ones here. This is another beautiful column called the Ratna Kambalam. These are all old designs that you see in several pattern books. This is a 33 by 33 grid. And it's a one-stroke column again, where with a single stroke, you see that all the lines are connected. You can draw one by one. And this is so intricate that this has been used to study a lot of computer science concepts. Now we come to the second part, which is the Padi column. Padi column is something like a festive or an occasion column, where you don't have any dots for guiding the lines. There are several traditions on how a Padi column can be drawn, and you usually see that the number of lines are always even numbers. Then the lines are always interspersed with patterns like flowers or spirals or stars, knots, symbols, so many ideas. These are very reminiscent of step wells or temple column. And a lot of these designs are actually are used as prototypes for architecture, even from the olden times. These are 2 beautiful Padi columns that you see. These are generally practiced in Iyer communities. You can see this, the Solomon's knot that I was talking about in the origin of Kolam. There are 4 Solomon's knots that have been drawn here, and it is so well integrated into the cultural landscape of our Kolam. This is a very typical Vaishnava style kind of Kolam called Tirupindi. You can see that this is kind of it is kind of similar to an higher style padi kolam in that the lines, there are even number of lines again with lotus and other such similar patterns. But the center and all the, generally there are, you don't see any straight lines, you see a concave line. These are some beautiful kolams practiced by the Nagarattar community. They are called Naduvittu kolams. This Naduvittu kolams are believed to be the harbinger of prosperity and happiness. And all the symbols that you see in the used in the Naduvittu kolams, they are filled with so many meanings and inherent symbolism. This is really spectacular. These are some kolams which are inspired by patterns from ancient times. This is the Shri Yantram or the Shri Chakram, and this is the Mooladhara Chakram, where you see several geometric shapes, and it's gone by these lotus petals. You can see the lotus petal here also. Lotus is a flower that finds its way into a lot of kolam designs. These are ritual kolams called Navagraha kolams. The designs are said to have been derived from the tantric work Saundarya Lahari, attributed to Adi Shankara, and they are also used on a daily basis to draw appropriately for that particular day of the week. Now we come to festive kolams. These kind of kolams you see being drawn on specific festive occasions. So, for example, if it is Pongal, Pongal is a festival that we commemorate the sun god. So you see the chariot with the sun in it, and this is also a ter with the sun god. You can see the symbol chakram here. And these are the Pongal Panes, a more contemporary design. And you can see that these three are Pulli kolams, while this is a Sikka kolam. You have the Krishna Jayanti, where kolam is an implicit part of the festivities. The Krishna Kal with the Sikku kolam and a Krishna Kal inside it. And this is a freehand drawing. You can see the symmetry in this kolam and the Krishna Kal again. And this is a beautiful Sikku kolam depicting the Tottil, where you welcome Devi Krishna. Here you have some kolams for the Kartige festival, Kartige Deepam. I find that the lamps add so much of beauty to these festive kolams. It generates so much of positivity and peace to the surroundings. This is the splendor of Margari, which is renowned to be the kolam month of the year. Every morning you will find that people are out on the street by dawn to draw spectacular kolams. You can see this beautiful radial kolam, the round shape, with a Pushani poo in the center, kept with some cow dung, as is the tradition for celebrating Margari. This is the Mylapore festival, Kolam festival, the Kolam competition that usually happens in the month of January, at the end of the Margari season, just before Thai begins. Now we come to the philosophy of kolam. Philosophy behind drawing kolam can be a very personal experience. We say that kolams are ephemeral. They have a short span of life. So every morning there's a cycle of birth when the creator draws the kolam on the floor. And then as the day progresses, people stamp on the floor on the kolam and it merges with the ground and dies. Subsequently, the next day begins and another kolam is born. We can also say that kolam is a sort of a metaphor to practice detachment. So when I create a kolam, I find that a little bit of me goes into that creation. I look at the kolam, I think that it's very beautiful. And then once I'm done drawing the kolam, I detach myself from the intricacies of it so that my life can go on with other things. And then as the day progresses, people stamp on the kolam. I cannot mourn that this happens, right? So we practice It's a way to see this as detachment. A column is also something that provides that kind of reinforces that there can be infinite number of solutions to every problem that we face, even in life. So when you draw a grid and you start drawing a column, you see that you imagine that you want to draw a certain design, but sometimes muscle memory acts otherwise. And then doesn't mean that it has to be seen as an error. That is the philosophy. You can actually change it as and when uh, you start drawing to get new designs. Then there's also a sort of philosophy that believes that the dots and lines in the column, where the dots stand for the ups and downs or the obstacles that we face in life, and the lines are the course that life takes around these obstacles. There's always an option, right? There is no space where a line cannot be drawn. It's also a nice metaphor for connecting the dots, where you connect the dots and see the larger picture, gives you a whole new perspective, a fresh perspective. Now, here is the scientific aspect of the column. We come to the mathematics behind column. Naturally, column arouses intellectual curiosity through this branch called ethnomathematics, where the principles, theories, the properties, and concepts of this particular school, all of them are steeped within ritual or artistic forms. The practitioners, the interesting part is that many times practitioners are not really aware of the layers of mathematical complexities in drawing the column. This comes organically and naturally from bodily experience and the bodily orientations. There are countless one-stroke patterns using simple elements and rules. So we see that concepts of mathematics can be implemented. Here is a one-stroke design that you see. It begins here and eventually ends at the same spot that it begins. Then you also have geometric patterns of curved lines, labyrinth loops, hexagonal fractals, about which we'll be talking about. The prospects can also be applied in more than these mathematical prospects can also be applied to toys, puzzles, tiles, which you can use to assemble different designs, then graphical language, architecture, and city planning, etc. This is a very fairly simple geometric column. You'll see how it is drawn. This is the grid that has been used. You can see the number of dots per line. This column is called as the Shri column or the Aishwarya column, said to bring prosperity, like an invitation to the goddess of prosperity and wealth, that is Lakshmi, and to Kubera. So this column, when finished, you'll see that there are a lot of triangles that are a part of this. When you look at a deeper meaning, you have two triangles here that is a merger of male and female energies, as is widely believed. To my memory, this seems like a damaru shape. So there are three damarus. There are two triangles and three damarus that you draw and end this column with. It's fairly simple, as you can see. Yes. Here you have different types of columns based on mathematical concepts. The spiral column, which begins and ends as a spring. We'll see the demonstration of one such spiral column. This is a radial column, circular in shape. Here you have a tessellated column, where you have different tile kind of a pattern. This is a hexagonal loop column, and this is a square loop column. So many mathematical concepts ingrained in this pattern, these patterns. This is the beautiful Hridaya Kamalam, which is you can see this column being drawn now. It's a very significant column with respect to rituals, and it's not usually drawn on a place where people can step on it. This Hridaya Kamalam is again an ode to the goddess Lakshmi, who's seated on a lotus. So the dot pattern is pretty simple. You can see that it is an imaginary circle here, which is divided into 8 segments. The segment lines are drawn in dots, and you follow a sequence. Let me rewind it for a bit. Yes, so you can see that in this picture you see the way the dots are placed, imagining a circle here, and you follow, it's a single line where you follow this particular sequence where the first dot of the first segment, then you proceed to the next segment, third dot, fifth, second, fourth, and so on. You keep following this sequence until you are able to finish the code. You can see that after a point, it's the muscle memory at work. This is the beautiful Hridaya Kamalam. Traditionally, we write Hridaya Kamalam around this kolam. This is the dried kolam that you see. Now we come to this interesting part of the Fibonacci series in Kolam. This is a part which actually amazed me. Professor Narayanan, he did research on the connection between columns and the Fibonacci series. The Fibonacci series is a very significant one in mathematics. You see the series here. It's pretty simple how the series progresses this way. 0 and 1 are the first two numbers, after which the third number is the sum of the first and the second number. The fourth number is the sum of the previous two numbers, and so on. That's how the series is constructed. So take it roughly into this equation where C equal to A plus B, where A and B are the previous two consecutive numbers of C in the series. Now there's something called a golden rectangle in the Fibonacci series. This rectangle of consecutive Fibonacci numbers as sides. So a 2 unit by 3 unit rectangle is called a golden rectangle. Likewise with 3, 5 or a 5, 8, 5 by 8, 8 by 13, etc. This is the golden rectangle. And you also have this important golden ratio, which is the ratio of the sides of the rectangle, where in the Fibonacci series, when you divide the bigger number by the the previous number in the series, the ratio is a limiting figure of 1.6. It's not always exactly 1.666, but somewhere around roughly in that figure. Now this golden ratio is ubiquitous in nature, where you find that in branching of trees, in the arrangement of flower petals, when you see flower petals, there's always a symmetry associated with it, which points to this golden ratio. So you see spiral patterns of florets in sunflowers, the spiral shapes on seashells. It's amazing that this golden ratio is associated so closely to the growth process in nature. It's also believed to figure prominently in Western art, in architecture of the pyramids and Parthenon in Greece, and in paintings, especially the Vitruvian Man by Da Vinci. You have sculpture, poetry, music, and this is quite controversial. So it's to be taken. I mean, we just say that there's so much of association between art, Western art, and the golden ratio. Now coming to the Fibonacci column, this is built with Fibonacci numbers, and it showcases the elegance of this series. We'll see how. If you take a square of side 8, it can be drawn using a square of side 2 and 4 golden rectangles of side 3 and 5. You see an example of how a Fibonacci column can be drawn. It sounds technical, but with figures, you can easily see the beauty of it. Now, this is the Fibonacci column. It's fairly simple to draw again, but we'll see how it is constructed. We consider any 4 consecutive Fibonacci numbers. I'm taking 4 easy numbers here. 1, 2, 3, and 5. These are consecutive Fibonacci numbers. Assign them as A, B, C, and D. Now, Professor Narayanan derives that these two equations from the basic equation C equal to A plus B. I'll not get into the technical intricacies of how he derives these equations here, but let's just say that we can see how this equation is satisfied by this column. Now, this is a triangle, which is a B by C. I'm sorry, this has to be 2 by 3. So 2 by 3, and it's made up of the squares 2 by 2 square and another 1 by 2 square added to it. So this gives you the equation BC equal to B squared plus AB. You see, this one column is a combination of these two columns. Again, this is another equation which is beautifully demonstrated by this column, where you see D squared equal to A squared plus 4BC. Now BC is this golden rectangle. You see that when you add this square, when you intersperse this square between 4 of these rectangles, you get this 5 by 5 square, which is a Fibonacci number again. You see how elegantly it's all coming together here, where a 5 by 5 square is constructed as a combination of a 1 square and 4 2 by 3 rectangles. If you do this, this can be extrapolated for larger Fibonacci numbers, and the result actually blows the mind. Now we have the concept of symmetry in mathematics through the column. Here is a column drawn by Srimati Kasturi, where you see that bilateral symmetry is very apparent, which is symmetry that you see when you mirror these two sides. This side is a mirror of this side. That is bilateral symmetry for you. It's a 90-degree rotational symmetry in a column, where when you rotate this column by 90 degrees, you get the same column. When you rotate the column by 45 degrees, you get a whole different perspective of the same column. This is a beautiful column, a traditional design called the Sahasradhala Padmam, where you see rotational symmetry. Every angle you rotate to, it will remain the same. The column remains the same. It intersperses with itself. Now we come to the concept of fractals. Fractals are infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. So when you enlarge this pattern, you get the same statistical character of the original. So you keep on adding to this by making it into a pattern like this. So when you zoom in, the smallest unit will have the same design. This is a column that depicts fractals for you. And this kind of column, fractal column, is used to explain concepts of progressions, where you have AP, GP, and EP, which is arithmetic, geometric, and exponential progressions. So these kind of columns help us to study that. Now you move on to columns in computer science, where columns provide rich insights into the structure of picture languages. What is a picture language? Picture language is similar to natural languages. It is made up of a restricted set of basic units, and it has to follow a specific formal rules for putting these units together. That's a picture language. Now, picture language is defined by what is called an array grammar. So array grammar is what? An archetype of that picture language, or an algorithm to derive some concept of the picture language, or formulae that is used by the picture language. All these are defined in array grammar. And this array grammar can be roughly categorized into 3 types, where you have the finite matrix column, the regular matrix column, and the context-free array column. A finite matrix column is a simple column which consists of single distinct patterns. You don't see a same pattern repeating itself. So it's a simple column essentially, which has simple rules. which are used to construct that column. Now you have the regular matrix column. A regular matrix column is a square or a rectangular column with repetitive patterns. This, again, is a regular matrix column. You see how the same fractal column now is used to explain something else, where this is the basic column, which when you repeat, you get a matrix of 5, and you can repeat this n number of times to get a matrix of size n. This picture you see here is from a copy of the Arputa Kolam Manjari, a Kolam based text on Kolam and other cultural forms like Gummi and such dance, written by C. Ammani Ammar, published in the year 1901. She calls this Kolam as Elimichanguttu. It's also colloquially referred to as anklets of Krishna in other texts. Now, this is context-free array grammar, where you see that a basic column design here can be extrapolated into larger designs. This can be used to generate patterns. This column is called the Katrikol column. The Katrikol column can be extrapolated into larger Katrikol columns, where you can see that this column and this column, the design is not the same like a regular matrix column, but it has been adapted to this dot structure. That is context-free array grammar for you. Now we have the concept of linear diagrams. This beautiful Ratna Kambalam, which looks so complicated, can be simplified into this linear diagram. You can see that each 3 by 3 square in this Ratna Kambalam is converted into this, where you see a pattern emerging as to what kind of a design this Ratna Kambalam is, what is weaved into it. Now this design can be converted into this simple archetype, which when you keep expanding and adding more rules of the grammar, you arrive at a column like the Ratna Kambalam. So this is used to study pattern picture languages, again, in the field of computer science. Now we come to a very interesting part of the column, which is the ecological context in which the column exists. Now the Hindu sacred text called the Manusmriti has laid down that one of the daily offerings for a Hindu householder is the Pancha Yajna, which is 5 yajnas or Pancha Yajna, which is 5 obligations that have to be fulfilled by a Hindu householder. One of them, called the Prahuta, means to feed all the created beings. Easier said than done when we look at beings as human beings only. So only the kings and the rich were able to fulfill this. However, when you look at beings as all beings, the column helps you to satisfy this obligation, where you use raw rice powder and draw on the floor, and insects and birds and other invisible beings and critters can also feed on the column. Then you have this beautiful concept where you draw a column as a reverence for Bhudevi, the goddess of the earth. She bears a burden, and the drawing of column makes you commemorate that sacrality of Bhudevi. So when you draw a column on the earth, you signify that it is signified that the earth is sacred. On the one hand, on the other hand, the same earth we trash and we throw garbage, and we do other things which are not really sacred. Now, it's a wonder how a mythological link to the earth it's not leading to a greater reverence to the soil in everyday life. Now, how is that? Because you think something is sacred, so you should have greater reverence to protect it, to take care of it. And at the same time, life also has to go on. So we all have our priorities, which is like a Bharatanatyam dancer pays obeisance to Bhudevi first, asks for forgiveness, and then the dance has to go on. Then you have the sacrality of the earth. You believe that the earth goddess, or any of the goddesses, the river goddess, the earth goddess that you associate with nature, they have the power to absorb, to purify, and to cleanse pollutants. So when you take a dip in the Ganga, it is believed that your sins are washed away with the river. Now, this also makes, while the river, because you consider the river sacred, it makes people believe that they cannot destroy the soil or the waters, right? Who are we to make the goddess impure? We don't consider that aspect, which is why it becomes a paradox where we believe that sacredness prevents traditional Hindus from understanding that Bhudevi or the Ganga or the Tulasi plant, it needs to be protected from us. Now, all of this context is largely taken from the works of Ms. Vijaya Nagarajan, who has written extensively, who's researched extensively on the ecological context of columns. Now, how do we preserve this kolam as an art form? There are so many ways today that we see that the kolam culture is setting in. It's becoming increasingly popular. It's done through oral knowledge transfer over the years of all these, through the centuries. We see that through observation and through oral knowledge transfer is how we have been able to retain the designs and the patterns, and also a documentation of the know-hows and books. You see that precious, uh, almost always practitioners use hand-drawn pattern notebooks, which I consider very precious today. There's also a change in the tradition organically with time, where you see that the column is used in other forms as well. You see block prints here. Then you also allow the tradition to change organically. We have so many printed column books here. Then you have, of course, column groups where people practice columns from their comfort of their homes through digital media. You also have contemporary applications like this is a column embroidered sari. Then you have palagas, which have been painted with column designs, ceramic. This is a Tanjore painting with the Sri column, etc. Now here is the future of column. So we how this organically happens is by observation again and through teaching and learning. You see young minds at work at a workshop in Tenangur, and the wonderful part is that the gender narrative around the kolam, where kolam is traditionally practiced by women, this is slowly changing over time. You see that Mr. Naman is posing with his Padi Kolam here, and so many boys are learning at this workshop. Here is a young child learning a one stroke 3 by 3 column. So you start here, and a one stroke column means that you end here too.
Wow.
Can I do one more here?
Okay.
Here it's very clear that you don't generally lift your pen, so it's practically requiring a lot of experience to do the same with the polar podi or the marble. This is how it happens. This can be extrapolated into bigger grids. Here are kolam practitioners who are adhering to the practice of drawing the kolam from around the world. You see Srimati Hema Kannan here from Mumbai with her spectacular Kartika Deepam special kolam. This is Srimati Kasturibai from Kuala Lumpur with her beautiful elaborate Sikka kolam. Srimati Shanti Seshadri drawing a Iyengar Tirupindi here with lotus and buds and traditional designs. This is Srimati Sumati, who has drawn another beautiful design of the kolam, which seems like lotus petals. It also bears resemblance to a Celtic knot. And then you have Srimati Vince Raj with the Sikh kolam in Singapore, and Sri Naman Bhau from Ahmedabad with his Padi kolam again. Some of the references that I have used for this presentation, and I'd like to acknowledge all the people who have been instrumental in enabling me to put this information together for you. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining me in this wonderful journey through kolam. into the realms of literature, aesthetics, rituals, computer science, and geometry. So I hope you will now concur with me when I say that Kolam is indeed the perfect blend of art and science. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Janani. That was a really wonderful talk. We are now ready to take a few questions. I understand that some of them are finding it difficult to type it. So you may now unmute yourself to ask a question if you would like.
First of all,
Thank you,
I need to...
Janani. We're delighted to have Ms. Leela Sampson here today and look forward to her inputs. Maybe we'll do that just after the question answer. Welcome, Leela.
Thank you, Sujata.
Yeah.
Welcome, Leela.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. But I think others should ask their questions first and then I'll come back.
Yeah. So somebody was just starting. Can you go ahead, please?
First of all, before I want to ask a question, I like the presentation in which she presented and how the way she explained, Janani ma'am. So I would like to thank you. And I asked in chat box, like, which is your favorite column?
Thank you, Roshni. I think favorite column is a very hard question. There are so many types of columns, so I have a favorite that is based on that time and that point of the mood at that point of time. Right now, I'll say that I'm going through a phase where I love Sitka columns because of the challenges that it makes me face when I'm drawing the column. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, so there is a question on YouTube from Soundarya Lakshmi. She says, a beautiful session, Janani, with science incorporated to Kolam. Do you have plans to hold a class on Kolam?
I haven't really thought about it. There are actually so many classes that happen over either YouTube or Instagram or Facebook. So for now, I think I'll probably join one of the classes to learn them myself. Thank you.
How do you do that polycolumn, Miss Janani? Janani ma'am?
The polycolumn as in the column with the dry mix, is it?
Yeah.
So if you see the video of a Sitka column that was presented during the presentation, you have to pinch the floor between your thumb and the index finger. And then you apply stress on the floor by slowly releasing it along the finger. So when you want to draw a line, you take the Kolam-A and you do this to get a line. It comes easily with practice. So you can draw curved lines like that. So when you press the mixture for the dry mix, it flows through this gap. And you can draw the amount of stress that you apply at this point will enable the thickness of the column. It decides the thickness of the column. You can experiment with kolapudi, your friendly neighborhood kolapudi sellers, and you can try it at home on the floor. Thank you.
Ma'am, there is another question in chat box, ma'am, that is there anything called floating column and all?
Okay, hold on, please. Let me have a look. I think the presentation will be available on YouTube. So people who want to see a particular column can always go and watch the presentation again. So this is to answer the question, can you show the rabbit column?
So we have one question.
Mhm.
In Andhra Pradesh, there is another kolam pattern called Nelingatta Muggulu, which are drawn with the help of lines like Pambu kolam. Can you please throw some light on that?
We have such patterns of snakes, so intertwined with one another, and an image that kind of roughly looks like this, with the snakes spiraling around each other. Yes, we have such patterns as well. It's there. I remember seeing some in the Arputa Kolamanjari text, which is available as a PDF online. Thank you.
Nitya Balaji asks, where do the floral columns of Kerala and floating petals on water fit in your classifications?
I'm talking about Kolam, so I was only referring to this aspect of the Kolam. Of course, there are different regional variations, like I said, where you use colored powders, calling it Rangoli, or you use flowers and call it Pookalam. And you have floating flowers in an urli. All these are different types of Kolam too. Today, my focus was on the Kolams as they are called in Tamil Nadu. So I was talking about the Kodi Kolams and the Ma Kolams. Thank you.
We will just take a question from YouTube. Sunayana Chowdhury asks, what is the connection with menstruation and kolam?
Well, traditionally, it is believed that menstruating woman is ritually not pure to do something which is part of the religious belief, which is why uh, she was not drawing the columns during that point of time. If you ask me personally, I would say it's each one's individual choice. So if you're going to follow the tradition, then you follow the menstrual separation and that as well. If you don't, then I guess drawing the column makes no difference to you whether or not you're menstruating. So it's a personal choice, is what I would say. Thank you.
We'll take another question from one of the viewers on YouTube. Ramya Rajagopal asks, any references or examples of Isai kolam?
Well, I'll have to probably work on that further. I could not find any for now. I hope that some experts in the field of drawing column will be able to throw more light, maybe for another session.
And actually, there's a question from Zoom that Kishan Barali Das asked that is there any type of
Could you
before
please?
BCE?
I'm sorry?
Is there any type of column that is before BCE, before Common Era, that is?
BCE, so if you look at the presentation, it is not called as kolam. So there are several yantrams and patterns that are drawn today, which are supposedly inspired by the patterns which existed in 1500 BCE, etc. That answers your question, I suppose.
Shobana asks, could you please explain or give references for how kolam is related to or extrapolated to architecture and space design?
Well, I'll probably tell you something from what I perceived in my travels. If you look at, say, a place like Hampi, where you have the Raja's enclosure, which has a beautiful step well that you can see in many films. That step well, if you look at an aerial view of the step well, you'll be able to see the association between Padikolam and the step well. I urge you to probably have a look. Just looking for it online as Hampi step well, and this is probably one of the first visuals that you'll see. If you can see an aerial view of that well, you'll see that it closely resembles the designs of a Padikolam. So I presume that at some point, when we didn't have CAD and CAM to draw your patterns and technology to enable visualization of architecture, I think these probably were techniques that were used, could have been used. Thank you.
Lakshmi Devan viewing on YouTube asks, do you have any suggestion for the beginners who are aspiring to learn Kolam?
Yes, I do. There are umpteen number of books from which I'll probably talk from my perspective as to how I learned. Um, uh, Drawing very simple patterns. First, if you look at the presentation, you will have different varieties of columns. So have a look and see what design appeals to you. Then the simplest form of that design, like a 3x3 column, you can try doing different designs with that grid. There are umpteen medium of instruction, umpteen means to see different designs which you can draw on paper and then try to draw on the floor as a column. So paper design gives your muscle memory, and then slowly drawing it on the floor will enable your fine motor skills as well to work in your favor to draw the column on the floor. Thank you.
Is there any column design from the Vedic ages? Asks a viewer.
Yeah, this is what I mentioned for instance, the yantrams that you see, some of the patterns that are drawn are apparently from the Vedic age, like the Sri Yantra, etc. So I don't have too much information on this because I haven't deeply researched this topic. Thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of question answers.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Leela, to give your observations.
Namaskaram, Janani, and to all of you. This has been such a beautiful evening, well spent, listening to Janani talk about something that we have all grown up with, but which we take for granted. It's a sadhana that is, I wouldn't use the word disrespected, but a sadhana that normally is not paid enough credence to by the common man. People come out every morning, usually a maid these days, and makes a beautiful kolam with so much dhyanam, so much. Sadhana is the right word because it's kind of like a meditative practice. Just the body bent over with nothing else in view except this, what is flowing from her body through her hand onto the soil. It's such a beautiful, I think there's nothing that can compare with it. And yet while you were speaking, the things that came to my mind were actually dance, because நீங்க முதல்ல, you started with the idea of ephemeral, and I've always felt that dance, music is a step away. You can record it, but பழைய காலத்துல எல்லாம் you could not, a performance even of a child is of that moment. Now people record it on video and cameras and all, but when we were children, it was in the memory banks of our grandparents and in our mother's smile when she would recall an incident, how the child behaved. So this movement that happens impulsively from the heart, just you're not doing it for a result. You're doing it because you want to say something, want to do something. This is something that is so ephemeral. It's of the moment. Dance, I think, should always remain like that. It should remain of the moment. Whatever, even when you hold a camera in front of you, you've lost it because it's another eye. Looking from your own heart into the heart of a dancer or a musician, that is the only way that actually heals it, in my opinion. I may be wrong, but the other thing, of course, that you talked about was the whole idea of spatial contact, the whole idea of time and space, which we talk so much in dance about. But we also work with on Bhudevi, with our naked foot. And I've always disagreed with, for instance, when we started dancing in historical temples like Khajuraho and the various temples, the temple authorities came up with excuses that dancers, when they cannot dance on, they would destroy the temple. And these arguments came up in Khajuraho, and yet units of soldiers would come to see the temples with their full uniform and guns and with their boots on, and they would walk around. That was allowed. But a dancer, one single dancer with a naked feet dancing there for an hour was considered sacred. So we have to change our mindset about how these things, the sacredness of them, what does it actually mean? We also work with our hands, the whole idea of communicating through the hands, the gestures, the mudras, hasta mudras, and that it involves intense concentration, yet it's something that is a soft power. It gives joy to the person who cares to stop and look. You look at it and you are filled with some kind of curiosity. There's an intelligence there. There's a beauty of line and form. There's balance. There's aritham and letting go, the soft and hard lines that you spoke about. It's the same in art. It's the same in dance movement. It has to be, we talk of it as Tandava, Lasya and all, but actually male or female body, when it is working, it has to have both aritham and gentleness, grace and power. And it's the same with kolam, whether somebody a boy puts the kolam or a young lady puts a kolam. It doesn't make a difference. The other aspect that is so beautiful is the ritualistic part of it, that it is done every day. People tell us, our teachers used to tell us, you have to practice every day. Not for anybody, just for yourself. And I thought that was so beautiful. I mean, it would be wonderful to write a little, you and I should sit down and write a little thing on the connect between kolam and dance. But the main things are what goes into any creative process, and that is concentration, creative process, reverence for all life, reverence for your own body. For us dancers, the body is the instrument. And how can you detach the hand or the hand that puts that kolam from the body, mind and heart of that person? Ilya. So it is the same thing. It's the body as the instrument of creative process, as the instrument of creating beauty. And the connection of the five senses to the five elements, the connection between talam and, I mean, the five panchajatis of 3, 5, 7, and 9, and how those go into weaving around a chatushram. I mean, it's just so exciting. But most of all is the meditative practice. And for me, in a world that is becoming more and more selfish and self-oriented, and where everything is weighed against money, I'd like to say that the most beautiful thing about kolam putting is that, or the practice of these kolam, is that it's selfless, and almost a part of you dies every time you put it. That's what we say, that if a really beautiful artist dies every time on stage. I think that's the most beautiful thing. Thank you so much, Janani, and to INTACH for inviting me to spend an evening with you.
Thank you so much for sharing your views on that.
Thanks very much, Leela, for that wonderful insight, sensitive as always, and bringing home what we should realize. Thank you so much, Janani, for that wonderful presentation. I hope it stirred a lot of interest in kolams in many people from this state and outside, and especially in the younger generation. So absolutely looking forward to more kolams this Margari and later. Thank you all so much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.